The Galactic Empire had always prided itself on its overwhelming power, a power that spanned thousands of worlds and stretched across the galaxy like a vast, unyielding shadow. The Emperor's rule was unquestioned, and its enforcers, those who ran the Empire's vast network of diplomats, military leaders, and bureaucrats, were equally formidable. They controlled the fate of entire species, crushed rebellions with ruthless efficiency, and maintained a chokehold on every corner of space. The Empire had every reason to believe it was invincible, and for a time it was. But then came humans. To the Empire, humanity was an anomaly, an insignificant species barely worth acknowledging when it first rose to prominence in the galactic arena. Earth was a backwater planet in a corner of space, seemingly isolated from the greater galactic conflicts. But as humanity's influence began to spread, the Empire's leaders started to notice something. The humans didn't fight wars the way others did. They didn't follow the unwritten rules of galactic diplomacy. Their most powerful weapon was not their armies, nor their ships, but their minds. The galaxy had seen countless empires rise and fall, but none had ever quite experienced the peculiar nature of human diplomacy. Unlike other species who use force, deception, or subtle manipulation to achieve their goals, humans operated on a level that was both direct and unerringly unpredictable. Their diplomats, in particular, were known to speak with such raw honesty, such cold clarity, that even the most hardened bureaucrats and military leaders found themselves disarmed. No alien species, with all their advanced technology and cultural sophistication, had ever encountered a species like humans. It wasn't just that humans had a way of getting under the skin of their enemies. It was that they could turn the very weapon of negotiation into an art form. Humans weren't bound by the constraints of alien politics or the unspoken codes that govern other species' interactions. They were free to act, to say, and to think in ways that others never could. In the halls of power, where influence was more powerful than ships or fleets, humanity's diplomats became a force to be reckoned with. It wasn't long before the Galactic Empire began to fear them, and they had every reason to. The first signs of this fear came not from the battlefield, but from the negotiation tables themselves. The Empire, for all its military might, was a fragile beast. Beneath the surface of its polished veneer lay deep corruption, systemic rot that ran through every level of its bureaucracy. The Emperor's hold on power was shaky, and the factions vying for control were ever present, each looking for ways to secure their position. The Empire thrived on secrecy, manipulation, and the quiet oppression of its subject races. There was no room for truth, only convenience. That was where humanity had a distinct advantage. Human diplomats, in their quiet, methodical way, began to uncover these secrets. They learned the whispers between the Emperor's most trusted advisors, the dealings with corrupt alien merchants, and the dark corners where entire species were exploited for their resources. Humanity's diplomats were not merely negotiators. They were truth seekers. They knew that the real power didn't lie in what was said openly, but in the truths that lay buried beneath the surface. And once those truths were exposed, it was impossible for anyone to ignore them. The first major diplomatic mission that truly sent shockwaves through the Empire involved an emissary named Elisa Kane, a skilled negotiator whose reputation had grown within the human government. She was tasked with a seemingly simple mission: to broker peace between the Empire and a coalition of rebel worlds who had grown tired of the Empire's iron grip. To most, it would have been just another routine negotiation. But to the Empire, this was something far more dangerous. When Elisa arrived at the negotiation table, she was greeted with the typical condescension that was reserved for humans. They were seen as nothing more than a nuisance, a species to be pacified, ignored, or crushed when necessary. But Elisa's calm demeanor and her unnerving ability to read the room quickly shifted the tone. She wasn't like other diplomats. She wasn't there to beg for mercy or grovel for concessions. She was there to expose the cracks in the Empire's foundation, to lay bare the hypocrisy of its so-called peacekeeping. As the negotiations began, Elisa's strategy became clear. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She went straight for the heart of the matter, asking questions that no one had dared to ask before. "What is peace in a galaxy built on oppression?" she asked bluntly, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. The room fell silent, the question hanging in the air. It wasn't a challenge. It was a statement of undeniable truth. For the first time, the Empire's representatives found themselves on the defensive. They had no answer. How could they? They had built their empire on the backs of those they subjugated. The so-called peace was a lie, a thin veneer that masked the deep suffering of countless civilizations. Elisa's words had cracked that veneer open, and with it, the Empire's carefully constructed narrative began to unravel. The Empire's leaders tried to regain control by shifting the conversation, attempting to steer it back into familiar waters. But Elisa was relentless. She pressed them on every front. She highlighted the injustices, the exploitation, the brutal ways the Empire had used its power to crush dissent. She made them see themselves for what they truly were, and in doing so, she exposed the Empire's greatest weakness, its reliance on deception and coercion. What Elisa had done was simple, yet profound. She had shifted the focus from diplomacy as a means of negotiation to diplomacy as a means of truth. She wasn't just trying to make peace. She was trying to make the Empire face its own reflection. And as they looked into that mirror, they couldn't escape the realization that they were the villains of the galaxy, not the heroes they had always portrayed themselves to be. The fear that began to ripple through the Empire's leadership was palpable. They had never encountered a diplomat like Elisa Kane before. Someone who wasn't interested in making deals for the sake of deals, but someone who understood that the most powerful weapon in the galaxy was the truth. And that weapon, in the hands of humanity, was far more dangerous than any fleet or army. It wasn't long before word of Elisa's success spread. The Empire, for all its might, began to feel vulnerable in ways it hadn't considered. The very thing that had given it power, the ability to manipulate, deceive, and control, was now its greatest weakness. The humans had shown them that words, honesty, and the courage to speak truth to power could fracture an empire that had once seemed untouchable. As the negotiations continued, the Empire's representatives became more cautious, more hesitant. They knew that they were no longer dealing with a powerless species, but one whose diplomats could expose their darkest secrets and turn their own power against them. The fear that had once been a weapon of the Empire was now something they had to guard against. Humanity had proven that they were not to be underestimated, not through their weapons or their armies, but through their ability to see through the lies and uncover the truth that lay beneath. The Galactic Empire had feared humanity's diplomats for good reason. They were the ones who could topple empires with nothing more than words, and the galaxy had never seen a force like them before. As the humans gained ground in their diplomatic victories, the Galactic Empire, once confident in its ability to maintain control, found itself on the defensive. The Empire, accustomed to ruling through fear and manipulation, was now facing a threat that it didn't understand. It wasn't a fleet of warships or a wave of insurgents that threatened the Empire's dominance. It was the unexpected force of human integrity and transparency. Humanity's diplomats had become an unstoppable force, and the Empire realized that it had to find a way to counter this new weapon or risk losing everything. The first signs of humanity's rising power were seen when their diplomats were sent to broker deals with various alien factions that had long been under the Empire's thumb. The reactions of these alien species were telling. The once feared Empire had long relied on the intimidation of its vast military and secretive negotiations to keep its vassals in line. Yet, with humanity's diplomats stepping into the fold, something changed. The alien races that had been too afraid to challenge the Empire now found themselves emboldened, their voices no longer stifled by the oppressive shadow of imperial rule. The reason for this shift was simple. Humans did not operate by the same rules. While the Empire's diplomats would often dance around the truth, offering half-baked promises and using fear to extract concessions, humanity's representatives stood unwavering in their transparency. They presented facts as they were, regardless of how uncomfortable they might be for those in power. The Empire's representatives found themselves at a loss in these negotiations, unable to combat the relentless honesty of their human counterparts. It wasn't just that humans were good at negotiating. It was that their very approach shattered the illusions the Empire had carefully constructed. Human diplomats like Elisa Kane, who had first struck fear into the Empire's elite, were known for their ability to speak plainly, to ask the tough questions that no one else dared to ask. They didn't shy away from confronting the Empire about its most deeply held secrets, the exploitation of entire planets, the subjugation of intelligent species, and the growing unrest within the Empire's own ranks. To the Empire, this was not just an attack on their diplomacy. It was an existential threat. The truth was dangerous, and the humans had proven they could wield it like a weapon. This new dynamic caused deep unrest among the Empire's highest echelons. The Emperor's advisors, many of whom had been in power for centuries, knew that the Empire's strength had always been in its ability to control the narrative. But with humanity's diplomats pushing for truth and transparency, that narrative was starting to unravel. It was as if a veil had been lifted, exposing the cracks in the Empire's foundation. The growing sense of unease was palpable among the Empire's leadership. But what could they do? They could not silence the humans without risking their own collapse. The Empire's leaders began to take drastic measures to counter the influence of humanity's diplomats. They attempted to manipulate the flow of information, to paint humanity as a disruptive force rather than a legitimate power. They tried to brand them as troublemakers, misfits who were undermining galactic stability. Yet, despite all their efforts to turn the galaxy against them, humanity's diplomats only gained more respect. The truth, after all, had a way of standing on its own, and no amount of imperial spin could erase the undeniable facts humanity was presenting. In response to this growing threat, the Empire's leadership convened a secret council of their most trusted minds. They knew that they needed a way to neutralize humanity's diplomats before they became too powerful. Their first idea was to send agents to sabotage the negotiations, to disrupt the meetings by using covert tactics, bribes, blackmail, and even assassination. But time and time again, they found that such tactics failed. The humans were prepared. Their diplomats were trained not just in the art of negotiation, but also in the art of protecting their own. No matter how the Empire tried to undermine them, they could not silence the human voice. The next plan was more subtle. The Empire attempted to infiltrate humanity's diplomatic corps, planting spies among their ranks in hopes of discovering their strategies, their secrets. They tried to manipulate the human negotiators, to sow division within their ranks. But this, too, failed. Humanity's diplomats were united, bound by their core values of honesty, integrity, and justice. They didn't play by the same rules as the Empire. They had no secrets to hide. The more the Empire dug, the more they found that their efforts were in vain. The true turning point came when the Empire tried to resort to more extreme measures. They began to spread rumors about humanity's diplomats, trying to paint them as radicals, dangerous extremists whose actions would destabilize the galaxy. They sent out false reports, hoping to discredit the humans by using their own media to spread misinformation. Yet, once again, they underestimated humanity's ability to fight back with the truth. The diplomats quickly countered these lies, exposing the Empire's attempts to control the narrative and painting the Empire as the true aggressor. The Empire's strategies grew increasingly desperate. They attempted to provoke humanity into open conflict, hoping to discredit their diplomats by forcing them into a position where they would be seen as warmongers. But humanity, true to its nature, refused to take the bait. They remained calm, diplomatic, and resolute in their pursuit of peaceful solutions, all the while exposing the Empire's true nature for what it was. As the pressure mounted, the Empire's leadership began to fracture. Factions within the ruling class began to vie for power, each one blaming the other for failure to contain humanity's rise. The once unified front of the Empire splintered as the truth continued to spread throughout the galaxy. The rebellion within the Empire's ranks grew, with some of its own members openly defecting to the side of the humans, unable to stomach the lies any longer. The tide had turned. The Empire, with all its might, had tried every tactic in the book to suppress humanity's diplomats, to silence their voices. But each attempt had only made the humans more formidable. With each failed effort, the Empire's authority weakened. And as the galaxy watched, the Empire's grip on power began to slip away, its once mighty forces crumbling under the weight of their own lies. Humanity had shown the galaxy that the greatest weapon in any negotiation was not ships, not armies, but the unwavering strength of truth. And in the face of this unrelenting force, the Empire realized that it had lost the war before it had even begun. No matter how much power they wielded, no matter how many fleets they sent to crush their enemies, they could never defeat the truth. The age of the Empire was coming to an end, and humanity's diplomats had set the stage for a new era, one in which the Empire's fear of the truth would finally bring about its downfall. The final blow to the Galactic Empire's reign came not from the force of arms, but from the relentless pursuit of truth and justice. The Empire, once the most powerful entity in the galaxy, found itself cornered, unable to combat the human diplomats' unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth. They had underestimated the resilience and integrity of humanity, believing that their power, their fleet, and their espionage tactics would be enough to crush this rising force. But as the humans' influence spread, so did the understanding that the Empire's control was built on lies, manipulation, and fear, a foundation that was now crumbling. The tipping point came when a crucial summit, one that was supposed to reinforce the Empire's dominance, was scheduled to take place. Leaders from across the galaxy, representatives of both independent and vassalized systems, were expected to gather and pledge their loyalty to the Emperor. This summit was designed to reaffirm the power structure and give the Empire a renewed mandate to rule with an iron fist. For the Empire, it was the most critical event in years. The human diplomats, however, had their own plans. Elisa Kane, the foremost of humanity's diplomats, was tasked with leading the delegation to this summit. She was a woman of unparalleled integrity and sharp wit, known across the galaxy for her ability to turn the tables on her opponents. Her very presence was enough to unnerve the Empire. The humans had already made significant inroads within the galaxy's various factions, and their influence was growing by the day. Many of the smaller alien races, who had once been too afraid to speak out, now found themselves aligned with humanity, eager to challenge the Empire's oppressive rule. These alliances had begun to shift the balance of power. When the summit began, the Empire's leadership was on edge. They had been preparing for a grand spectacle, a show of power to reaffirm their dominance. Instead, they were met with a delegation of humans who refused to be intimidated. From the start, it was clear that this summit would not unfold as the Empire had planned. Humanity's diplomats, led by Kane, came prepared with facts, evidence, and a straightforward approach that cut through the Empire's carefully constructed facade. The humans weren't interested in playing the Empire's game of half-truths and empty promises. They came to expose the Empire for what it was, a corrupt and oppressive regime that had maintained control through fear and deceit. As the summit progressed, the Empire's representatives found themselves increasingly on the defensive. They tried to deflect the human questions with diplomatic jargon, hoping to obscure the truth, but Kane was relentless. She demanded answers, pushing the Empire's leaders to explain the atrocities that had been committed in their name. The imperial ministers, once confident in their ability to deceive, began to falter under her questioning. They were unprepared for a dialogue based on truth, unable to manipulate the narrative when the facts were laid bare. The tension in the room grew palpable. The representatives of the various factions in attendance began to take note. The smaller systems, which had once been too frightened to challenge the Empire, began to voice their concerns. One by one, they spoke out against the Empire's actions, citing specific examples of oppression and exploitation that had been ignored for decades. The Empire's facade was crumbling, and the humans had provided the spark that ignited a wave of dissent. But the true shock came when Kane presented irrefutable evidence of the Empire's darkest secrets. She revealed documents, intercepted communications, and testimonies from defectors, proof of the Empire's atrocities that had long been kept hidden. These were not rumors or half-formed allegations. They were concrete pieces of evidence that painted a picture of a regime built on lies and bloodshed. The galaxy had been kept in the dark for too long, and humanity had brought the truth into the light. As the truth unfolded, the atmosphere in the summit chamber shifted from tense to outright hostile. The Empire's leaders attempted to spin the revelations, but it was clear that the tide had turned. The galaxy had seen enough. The factions that had once been cowed by the Empires might now stood united with the humans. They realized that they had been complicit in the Empire's crimes by allowing it to continue its rule unchallenged. They no longer feared the Empire's fleet, for they had learned that the greatest threat to their survival wasn't a warship. It was the truth. The Emperor, once a figure of immense power, now found himself isolated. His advisors were abandoning him, and his allies were turning away. The humans had exposed a weakness that lay at the heart of the Empire. its inability to govern with honesty, integrity, or justice. The human diplomats had taken away the Empire's most potent weapon, its narrative control. With that power stripped away, the Emperor's hold on the galaxy was no longer secure. In the aftermath of the summit, the galaxy began to shift. Former allies of the Empire, those who had been too afraid to act, now found themselves emboldened. Systems that had once been subjugated by the empires might begin to demand their freedom, and the once dominant imperial fleet was no longer a force to be reckoned with. The tide had irrevocably turned in favor of humanity and its allies. The empire's reign, built on lies and manipulation, was unraveling before their eyes. As the empire's power faded, the humans emerged as the new leaders of the galaxy. They had shown that true strength lay not in military might or intimidation, but in the courage to stand for what was right, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. The diplomatic victories of humanity had fundamentally altered the power structure of the galaxy. What had once been a place of fear and oppression was now a realm where justice and truth were becoming the new order. The emotional resonance of this victory was felt throughout the galaxy. For those who had suffered under the Empire's rule, the revelations at the summit were a moment of catharsis. They had lived in fear for so long, believing that the Empire's power was unassailable. But now they understood that they had the power to change their fate. The humans had shown them that even the most tyrannical empire could be brought down not by force, but by the unyielding power of truth. In the end, the humans' diplomatic victory was more than just a triumph of politics. It was a reminder to the galaxy that the greatest weapon in the universe is the truth. The Empire had fallen not because it was defeated in battle, but because it could no longer hide its lies. And humanity, through its diplomats, had proven that the truth could shatter even the most powerful of empires. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson. No matter how strong the Empire appeared, it could not withstand the force of a united people standing up for what was right. As the dust settled and the galaxy began to reorient itself after the stunning revelations at the summit, humanity's position shifted from being a marginal force to one of central importance. The Empire, now a shell of its former self, struggled to maintain control, but the momentum for change was irreversible. The systems once dominated by the Empire now saw in humanity not just a beacon of hope, but a symbol of defiance. No longer were the human diplomats regarded as a mere curiosity. They had become a living testament to the power of courage and conviction. And so, as alliances between human factions and their newfound allies began to solidify, the threat of a galaxy-wide rebellion loomed large, and the first phase of rebuilding the galaxy under a new order began. The immediate aftermath of the summit saw a series of rapid, sweeping reforms within the galactic political structure. What had once been a series of feuding, fragmented systems was beginning to coalesce into something new. The human diplomats, who had once been viewed with suspicion and even disdain, were now sought after by leaders across the galaxy. Their unparalleled skill in negotiation, their integrity, and their commitment to justice had earned them the respect of both the smallest systems and the most powerful empires. The Galactic Senate, in its fractured state, was the first to experience the tremors of this new era. Once a symbol of imperial dominance, it had now become a battleground for those seeking to claim the mantle of leadership in the wake of the Empire's fall. Some factions, formerly loyal to the Emperor, sought to reassert their power, but their efforts were met with fierce resistance, particularly from a human delegation, which had earned a reputation for not merely protecting their own interests, but for fighting for the rights of the oppressed. The human representatives were vocal and forceful, demanding that no new empire rise to take the place of the old. What was needed, they argued, was a system built on equality, transparency, and shared governance. In this new political environment, the humans were no longer content to simply negotiate from the sidelines. They began to take a leading role, not just as diplomats, but as genuine political actors. Their influence, once confined to the realm of negotiation, now stretched across multiple facets of galactic governance. Under their guidance, the newly formed coalition of systems began to establish democratic frameworks that balanced the needs of the various factions. Humans did not seek to dominate, but to create a system where every voice was heard. The great irony was that the Empire, with all its vast military and technological superiority, had failed to understand this simple concept. It had sought to rule with an iron fist, believing that fear and power were the ultimate tools of control. But the humans had shown that a shared commitment to truth, justice, and cooperation could topple even the mightiest of empires. The next stage of humanity's rise was the establishment of a new council, one that would serve as the governing body of the galaxy. While many factions were initially hesitant about abandoning the traditional power structures of the past, the weight of the evidence presented by the humans made it increasingly clear that the old ways were no longer viable. They had seen firsthand the destructive force of unchecked power. The humans, in their brilliance, had convinced them that a new path was necessary, one that moved away from autocracy and toward a system of checks and balances, where no one group could hold unchecked dominion over others. The diplomatic victories were monumental. But what truly solidified humanity's place in this new galaxy was the unparalleled sense of unity they brought with them. While the Galactic Empire had built its rule on a foundation of division and coercion, humanity's strength lay in its ability to unite different races and ideologies under a single cause: the restoration of peace, freedom, and justice. Where the Empire had used force, humanity relied on collaboration, and this collaboration, grounded in shared values and mutual respect, became the cornerstone upon which the new galactic order was built. However, despite these successes, the remnant of the Empire did not go quietly into the night. Its influence may have waned, but there were still pockets of resistance that clung to the old ways. Some systems, especially those with vested interests in the Empire's aristocratic structure, felt threatened by the rise of a new coalition. The Empire's military remnants, though scattered, still posed a threat, and as these rogue factions attempted to regroup, they launched small-scale raids against a human-led coalition. But these were nothing more than the dying embers of a once great fire. The galaxy, having witnessed the courage and conviction of humanity, had already made its decision. No amount of military posturing could undo the progress that had been made. Humanity's leadership was not to be overthrown by force. It was being cemented by the unyielding will of those who sought a better future. What followed was a series of diplomatic missions designed to unite the remaining factions under the banner of peace. The humans, having learned the importance of negotiation, embarked on these missions with great care. They did not demand compliance. Instead, they fostered a spirit of cooperation. Systems that had once been enemies found themselves sitting at the same table, hashing out differences and agreeing on mutual goals. Slowly but surely, the fractured pieces of the galaxy began to come together, and what had once been a universe divided by conflict was now becoming a place where different species could coexist, thrive, and prosper. But even as peace seemed more achievable than ever before, there were those who whispered that the Empire's influence would never truly disappear. Some systems still believed that the Empire's iron-fisted rule was the only way to maintain order, and there were even factions that hoped to restore the Emperor to his throne. These sentiments, while growing increasingly rare, were not without influence. The final battle, however, would not be fought with weapons or fleets of ships. It would be fought with ideals. The idea that the galaxy could be a place of peace, cooperation, and mutual respect. Humanity's role in the galaxy was no longer defined by its past or by the struggles it had faced. Instead, it had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that even the most entrenched powers could be toppled when enough people were willing to fight for what was right. As the galaxy continued its transition into a new era, the story of humanity's rise became one of legend. They had faced the greatest tyranny the galaxy had ever known and had overcome it, not through brute force, but through unwavering resolve and the power of truth. And in doing so, they had proven to the stars that humanity was not just another species in the galaxy, but one destined to lead it toward a brighter future. The collapse of the Galactic Empire had sparked a profound transformation, but even in the wake of its destruction, the path forward was far from simple. Humanity, once seen as a weak and insignificant species, had become the very heart of the new galaxy. The Empire's fall had left a vacuum of power, one that humans were uniquely poised to fill, not through the might of armies or the manipulation of politics, but through the resilience of their ideals. What followed was not an easy road, but one paved with the unshakable conviction that the galaxy could be rebuilt into something far greater than it had ever been before. However, the challenge facing humanity was not just the rebuilding of a broken galaxy. The galaxy itself had to reconcile with its past. The Empire's reign had left scars that ran deep, and many races, systems, and individuals had suffered under its oppressive rule. The wounds left behind could not be healed overnight, and the scars would not fade easily. The distrust and resentment towards former imperial leaders, as well as the systems that had profited from tyranny, ran high. And yet, humanity was determined to show that the path to healing would come not through vengeance or resentment, but through the forging of new relationships, understanding, and a shared commitment to peace. At the heart of this new vision was the idea that no system, no matter how powerful, should hold dominion over others. It was a radical notion, one that challenged the traditional hierarchies that had long defined galactic politics. The human diplomats, having once been mocked and dismissed as irrelevant, now found themselves at the forefront of this revolution. Their approach was simple yet revolutionary: equality. They spoke not of the need for retribution, but the need for balance, for a galaxy in which every race, every system, every being had a voice and a place at the table. This was a dream that humanity offered, and it resonated deeply with the oppressed, with those who had long suffered under the Empire's heavy hand. But not everyone was ready to accept this new order. There were factions, remnants of the Empire, who clung desperately to the old ways. They saw in humanity's rise not a path to peace, but a threat to their way of life. These were the militaristic leaders, the warlords, the imperial loyalists who still believed that strength, dominance, and fear were the only means by which order could be maintained. They fought against the spread of humanity's ideals, launching campaigns to destabilize the fragile peace that was beginning to take shape. For them, the galaxy was a battlefield, and only the strong could survive. But this was where humanity proved its mettle. It was not through military might that the humans triumphed, but through the sheer force of their convictions. The human diplomats never wavered. They continued to meet with these factions, not with the intent to appease them, but with the intention to understand them. Through negotiation and compromise, they slowly began to break down the barriers that had once divided the galaxy. Even the fiercest of the Empire's loyalists were forced to reckon with the undeniable truth. Humanity had proven its worth, not just as conquerors, but as peacekeepers. The humanity that had once been mocked, the species that had once been pushed aside as weak, was now leading the charge for unity. As the negotiations continued, it became clear that the human-led coalition was not just a temporary alliance. It was becoming the foundation of a new galactic order. The systems that had once been in constant conflict were now cooperating, building a framework of governance that respected the autonomy of each race, while ensuring that no one would ever again have the power to subjugate another. This was a new promise of the galaxy, a galaxy in which unity did not mean uniformity, and strength was measured not by military might, but by the ability to coexist peacefully. But even in this new era, there were those who could not see beyond the power struggles of the past. There were pockets of resistance, pockets where the old ways of thinking still held sway. These factions were often smaller, more fragmented, but they were no less dangerous. They could not accept the idea that humanity, the species once dismissed as insignificant, had the audacity to lead the galaxy in a new direction. These factions launched their own insurgencies, attempting to sow discord and chaos. But time and again, humanity showed that their resolve was unbreakable. The strength of humanity lay not in its military prowess, but in its ability to inspire others. The coalition, once a loose confederation of disparate systems, had become a unified force for peace. Humanity's diplomats, along with their allies, worked tirelessly to address the concerns of the different races and factions. They understood that lasting peace could not be achieved through force or coercion. It had to be built through trust and mutual respect. Each negotiation, each agreement reached, strengthened the bonds between the systems, turning the coalition from an idea into a reality. It was not an easy process. There were setbacks, moments when it seemed that the new order might collapse under the weight of its own ambitions. The galaxy was vast, and the challenges it faced were enormous. Yet, the human diplomats never lost sight of their ultimate goal, a galaxy free from tyranny, where each race and system had the opportunity to flourish. They knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but they also knew that they had already achieved the impossible. They had toppled the Empire, they had united a fractured galaxy, and they had proven that humanity was more than capable of leading the galaxy into a new age. In the years that followed, The galaxy would continue to change. The scars of the past would fade, and a new order would take shape, one that was more equitable, more just, and more hopeful than anything the galaxy had ever known. And in this new era, humanity would stand as a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of ideals and the strength of unity. The once feared diplomats, now revered as the architects of the new galaxy, had proven that even the most oppressed, the most underestimated, could rise to reshape the future. And in doing so, they had shown the galaxy that the greatest strength lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the capacity to heal, to forgive, and to build something better.